The smoke found her before the flames did. Lydia Windrider pressed herself against the far wall of the storage barn, her hands splayed protectively over the barely there swell of her belly. 3 months. 3 months of hiding the pregnancy, of praying to the moon goddess that she could keep this secret long enough to escape. And now the acrid burn of smoke curled through the gaps in the wooden slats, and she understood with terrible clarity that there would be no escape. Lightning had struck the roof. She'd heard the crack, felt the barn shudder around her, and then the orange glow had begun creeping across the ceiling like a living thing hungry for fuel. The summer storm still raged outside, rain hammering against the walls, but the water couldn't reach the flames that had already caught in the dry hay stored in the loft above her. "Please," she whispered, though she didn't know who she was begging. "Please, not my baby. Take me, but not—" A fit of coughing seized her, the smoke thickening with every passing second. She dropped to her knees, pressing her face toward the floor where the air was marginally clearer. Her wolf stirred weakly inside her, the creature that had been her companion since birth, now barely a whisper after months of suppression. They'd made her take the herbs. Her pack, no, her former pack, had forced wolfsbane tea down her throat every morning since she'd presented as Omega, claiming it was for her own good, to keep her docile, to keep her controllable. The herbs had nearly silenced her wolf entirely, and now, when she needed that primal strength to survive, she had nothing but her own failing human body and the desperate need to protect the life growing inside her. She'd been locked in here at sunset. Marin had done it. Marin, her pack sister, who had once braided flowers into Lydia's hair and whispered secrets under moonlit skies. Marin, who had wanted the beta's son for herself and had never forgiven Lydia when he'd shown interest instead. "You spread your legs for someone outside the pack," Marin had hissed through the barn door, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "Everyone knows it. That thing in your belly isn't pack blood. The Alpha agrees. You'll stay here until the council decides what to do with you." It was a lie. The child was Torvin's, the beta's son, who had cornered Lydia in the forest and taken what he wanted before discarding her like refuse. When she'd discovered the pregnancy, she'd been foolish enough to go to him, believing he might claim responsibility. Instead, he'd laughed and told Marin everything, twisting the story until Lydia became the villain, the outsider, the whore who had betrayed their pack. No one had believed her when she'd tried to explain. The Alpha had looked at her with cold eyes and said, "A wolf who can't keep her legs closed brings shame to us all. You'll answer for this." Now the barn was burning, and she could hear nothing but the roar of flames and the distant rumble of thunder. No footsteps, no voices calling for her, no rescue. "They're going to let me die," she realized, and the thought was so enormous that for a moment she couldn't breathe at all. "They locked me in here knowing the storm was coming, and they're going to let me burn." Her hand pressed harder against her belly. A fresh wave of smoke rolled over her, and she gagged, tears streaming down her face. Though whether from the burning in her eyes or the grief cracking her chest open, she couldn't say. "I'm sorry," she choked out, speaking to the child who would never see moonrise. "I'm so sorry, little one. I tried. I tried to keep you safe." The ceiling groaned above her. Sparks rained down, and she curled herself into a ball, making herself as small as possible. Heat pressed against her skin like a physical weight. She thought of her mother, dead 3 years now from a fever that swept through the pack. She thought of her father, killed in a border skirmish before Lydia could even walk. She'd always been alone in this pack, tolerated but never truly welcomed, and now they'd found their excuse to be rid of her entirely. A burning beam crashed down 10 feet from where she crouched. The impact sent a shower of embers across the floor, and Lydia scrambled backward, her back hitting the wall hard enough to drive the breath from her lungs. She was trapped. There was nowhere left to go. The flames were beautiful, she thought distantly. orange and gold and white at their hottest core, dancing and writhing like living things, almost like wolves themselves, feral and hungry and utterly without mercy. She closed her eyes. The wall exploded inward. Lydia screamed, throwing her arms over her face as debris flew past her. But it wasn't flame that came through the shattered wood. It was a man. A massive figure wreathed in smoke and shadow, moving through the inferno as if the fire were nothing more than an inconvenience. He was enormous, broad-shouldered and towering, and his eyes glowed gold in the firelight, bright as captured stars. "Can you stand?" His voice was deep, rough, commanding in a way that made her wolf stir with sudden, desperate alertness, despite the wolfsbane swimming in her veins. Lydia couldn't speak. The smoke had stolen her voice, or perhaps it was the shock of seeing him, this impossible stranger who had walked through a wall of fire to reach her. She tried to push herself up, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. The world was spinning, the heat and smoke and terror finally overwhelming her body's ability to cope. He didn't wait for her answer. In one smooth motion, he scooped her into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. His body was warm, impossibly warm, warmer even than the flames around them, and hard with muscle beneath what felt like leather armor. She should have been afraid. A strange man, a strange wolf, holding her while fire consumed the world around them. Instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Safe. "Hold on to me," he commanded, and Lydia obeyed without thinking, her fingers curling into the material of his cloak. He smelled like pine smoke and something deeper, something ancient and wild that made her wolf whimper inside her chest. Then he was moving, carrying her through the flames like they couldn't touch him. The fire licked at his boots, caught in the edges of his cloak, and he ignored it completely. Lydia buried her face against his chest, unable to watch, feeling the heat press against her exposed skin. She should be burning. They both should be burning. They weren't. The rain hit her like a benediction, cool and clean, and so shocking after the hell of the barn that Lydia gasped, her lungs seizing with the sudden change. He kept walking, carrying her away from the inferno, and when she finally dared to look back, she saw the barn collapse in on itself in a shower of sparks and flame. She would have died in there. She and her unborn child would have burned to ash, and her pack would have claimed it was the moon goddess's judgment. The man carried her into the forest, past the tree line where the rain didn't fall so heavily, where the canopy provided shelter from the worst of the storm. He set her down with surprising gentleness on a bed of moss beneath an ancient oak, then knelt before her, his eyes still carrying that faint golden glow. This close, she could see his face properly. Strong jaw shadowed with dark stubble, high cheekbones that spoke of noble blood, a scar that cut through his left eyebrow, pale against his tan skin. He was handsome in the way that storms were handsome, overwhelming, dangerous, impossible to look away from. "Are you hurt?" he asked, and his voice was softer now, though no less commanding. Lydia opened her mouth to answer, and that's when it happened. Their eyes met, truly met, and the world stopped. Heat flooded through her body, nothing like the flames she'd just escaped. This was different. This was internal, spreading from her core outward like sunlight breaking through clouds. Her wolf, dormant for so long, suddenly howled inside her chest with a strength that made her gasp. The sound that escaped her was half whimper, half cry, and she pressed her hand to her heart as if she could contain the sudden wildness erupting within her. He felt it too. She could see it in the way his whole body went rigid, his nostrils flaring as he scented the air between them. The gold in his eyes intensified, bleeding outward until there was no trace of any other color, and a rumbling growl escaped his chest, not threatening, but reverent, awed. "Mate," he breathed. the single word carrying the weight of prophecy. Lydia trembled. The pull toward him was physical, magnetic, a force she couldn't have resisted even if she'd wanted to. Every cell in her body was suddenly, desperately aware of his presence, the breadth of his shoulders, the heat radiating from his skin, the way his scent wrapped around her like a promise. I don't understand, she managed, though she did. Every wolf knew what this was. Every wolf dreamed of finding their true mate, that one soul crafted by the moon goddess to complete their own. But she'd never expected, never imagined. "What's your name?" he asked, and the question was gentle, almost tender, completely at odds with the intensity of his gaze. "Lydia," she whispered. "Lydia Windrider. Lydia." He said her name like he was tasting it, memorizing it, claiming it. "I'm Alec, a traveling soldier." He paused, something flickering across his face that might have been uncertainty. "You're pregnant." It wasn't a question. Of course he could scent it. Any wolf could, up close. Lydia's hand flew protectively to her belly, and she braced herself for the disgust. The rejection. She'd just found her mate, and now she would lose him before she'd even had a chance to. "Is the father alive?" Alec asked, and his voice had gone cold. Not toward her, she realized. Toward whoever had put that child in her belly. "He doesn't want it," she said, the words coming out brittle. "Doesn't want me. My pack. They—" Her voice broke. She couldn't finish. Alec's jaw tightened. For a moment, the air around them felt heavy, charged with something that made the hair on her arms stand up. Power. Raw, barely contained power that seemed to press against her skin like a physical force. "Tell me," he said quietly. "Tell me everything." And Lydia, who had learned never to trust anyone, who had spent months hiding and lying and surviving by keeping secrets. Lydia looked into those golden eyes and felt the mate bond humming between them like a plucked string. And she told him. She told him about Torvin, about the forest, about the way he'd held her down and taken what he wanted while she'd begged him to stop. She told him about the pregnancy, about going to Torvin for help and finding only mockery. She told him about Marin's jealousy, the lies, the way her entire pack had turned against her. The wolfsbane tea they'd forced her to drink until her wolf was barely a whisper. The barn. The fire. She told him everything, and Alec listened without interrupting, his face growing darker with every word. By the time she finished, trembling and exhausted, his hands had curled into fists at his sides. "They left you to die," he said, and the words were barely recognizable, more growl than speech. "Yes." Something ancient and terrible flickered in his eyes. "They will answer for that." Lydia shook her head, too tired to feel hope. "They're a full pack. You're one wolf." The smile that curved his lips held no warmth. "Am I?" She didn't know what that meant, and before she could ask, exhaustion finally claimed her. The last thing she felt before darkness took her was his cloak settling over her shoulders, warm and smelling of pine smoke and something that felt like home. Lydia woke to birdsong and confusion. For a long, disoriented moment, she couldn't place herself. The ground beneath her was soft. Moss, she realized, the earthy scent of it filling her nostrils. Above her, leaves rustled in a gentle breeze, dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy to paint shifting patterns across her closed eyelids. Everything was quiet, peaceful. So utterly different from the roaring inferno of her last conscious memory that her mind refused to reconcile the two realities. Then she smelled pine smoke, and everything came rushing back. Her eyes flew open. She sat up too fast, her head spinning with the motion, and her hands immediately went to her belly. Still there, still the gentle swell of new life beneath her palms. Still. "Easy." The voice came from somewhere to her left, deep and steady. "You're safe." Lydia's gaze snapped toward the sound, and there he was. Alec. The stranger who had walked through fire for her. He sat with his back against a tree perhaps 10 feet away, his long legs stretched out before him, and in the pale morning light, she could finally see him clearly. He was even more striking than her smoke-hazed memories had suggested. His dark hair fell in disheveled waves across his forehead, and his jaw was sharp enough to cut glass. But it was his eyes that held her. No longer glowing gold as they had in the firelight, but a deep, rich brown flecked with amber. They watched her with an intensity that made her breath catch. She was wrapped in his cloak. The realization hit her slowly, her fingers finding the heavy wool draped across her shoulders. It was warm despite the cool morning air, and his scent clung to the fabric, pine and smoke, and that deeper note she couldn't name, the one that made her wolf stir restlessly in her chest. "How long was I asleep?" she asked, her voice rough from smoke damage. "Through the night." He didn't move from his position against the tree, maintaining that careful distance between them. "The storm passed a few hours ago. I didn't want to wake you." Lydia's brow furrowed. She was alone in the wilderness with a stranger, pregnant and weakened and completely at his mercy, and yet her body refused to produce the fear those facts demanded. The mate bond, she thought, and the words sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with cold. "You stayed awake," she said. It wasn't a question. She could see the faint shadows beneath his eyes, the slight tension in his shoulders that spoke of a night spent on guard rather than at rest. Someone needed to keep watch. For what? His expression shifted, a tightening at the corners of his mouth, there and gone before she could read it. "Your pack might have sent wolves to confirm you died in the fire. I wanted to be certain we weren't followed." "We." The word lodged beneath her ribs like a splinter. There was no reason for this man to consider them a we. They had known each other for mere hours, and most of those hours she had spent unconscious. And yet, the bond hummed between them, a constant low vibration that seemed to resonate in her very bones. Every time she looked at him, her wolf pressed against the walls of its suppression, straining toward him with a desperation that frightened her. "Why did you save me?" The question came out smaller than she intended. "You could have died in that fire." Alec's expression shifted, something raw and unguarded surfacing for just a moment before he controlled it. "I was surveying the territory when the storm hit. I'd sent my guards ahead, and was traveling alone to assess this pack without drawing attention." He paused, the muscles in his throat working. "And then I heard you screaming. I couldn't—" Another pause. "I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't leave you. But you didn't even know me." "No." His eyes met hers, and there was the gold again, just a flicker at the edges of his irises. "But I know you now." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning she wasn't sure either of them was ready to examine. Lydia found herself unable to look away from him, caught in that amber gaze like a moth drawn to flame. Her heart was racing, her skin flushed with warmth despite the cool morning, and every instinct she possessed was screaming at her to close the distance between them. She didn't move. Neither did he. "The mate bond," she finally said, because someone had to acknowledge the massive truth neither of them had fully addressed. "You felt it too. Last night when our eyes met." Alec's nod was slow, deliberate. "I felt it. And you're not—" She struggled to find the right words. "You're not running away? I'm pregnant with another man's child. I'm packless. I have nothing. No status, no family, no—" "You have me." 3 words. Simple, direct, utterly devastating. Lydia's throat closed around a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. She honestly couldn't tell which. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "I know the moon goddess doesn't make mistakes." He said it with such quiet certainty that Lydia found herself wanting to believe him. "I know you survived something that should have killed you. I know you protected your child even when you thought you were about to die. His gaze dropped to her hands, still pressed against her belly. I know you're stronger than you believe yourself to be. I'm not strong. The words came out before she could stop them, bitter and raw. My pack silenced my wolf with wolfsbane. My pack sister locked me in a barn to burn, the father of my child. Her voice cracked, and she had to look away, blinking against the sudden sting of tears. I'm not strong. I'm just trying to survive. The sound of movement made her tense, but when she looked up, Alec had only shifted his position against the tree, still maintaining that careful distance, still giving her space. Survival is strength, he said quietly. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. Lydia didn't know what to say to that. In the silence that followed, her stomach chose to announce itself with an audible growl, and heat flooded her cheeks. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, she realized. Perhaps longer. The pack had stopped feeding her regularly once the accusations began. Alec was on his feet before she could be embarrassed. I'll find food. There's a stream nearby. I smelled it last night. Stay here. Wait. The word escaped her before she could think better of it. Please don't leave me alone. Something softened in his expression. I'll only be gone a few minutes. You can hear me the whole time if you focus. Your wolf may be suppressed, but your senses should still be sharper than a human's. He paused, then added, almost gently, I'm not going to abandon you, Lydia. Not ever. She wanted to believe him. Every fiber of her being wanted to wrap itself in that promise and hold tight. But she'd believed people before, had trusted her pack, trusted Marin, trusted that she would be protected as every pack member should be, and that trust had left her locked in a burning barn. Still, she nodded, because what choice did she have? She was weak and tired and hungry, and this stranger with fire in his eyes was the only person in the world who seemed to care whether she lived or died. Alec disappeared into the trees, moving with a grace that seemed impossible for someone his size. Within seconds, she could barely hear his footsteps over the rustling leaves. Lydia sat in the hollow he'd left behind, wrapped in his cloak, breathing in his scent, and tried to make sense of the chaos her life had become in a single night. The mate bond pulsed steadily beneath her skin, warm and insistent, like a second heartbeat synced to a rhythm she was only beginning to learn. True to his word, Alec returned within minutes, his hands full of berries and what looked like wild mushrooms. He knelt several feet away from her and carefully arranged the food on a broad leaf, then slid it toward her with a gentleness that made her chest ache. I know it's not much, he said, but it should help until we can find something more substantial. Lydia reached for the berries, her fingers brushing his as she took the leaf. The contact was electric, a jolt of awareness that shot up her arm and settled somewhere behind her breastbone. She saw Alec go very still, saw the way his nostrils flared as if he was fighting to control his response, and she knew he'd felt it too. Thank you, she murmured, pulling her hand back quickly. He nodded once, then retreated to his position against the tree, watching as she ate. The berries were sweet, the mushrooms earthy and filling, and with each bite, Lydia felt her strength slowly returning. Where will we go? She asked between mouthfuls. I can't go back to my pack. They'll kill me if they find out I survived. They won't touch you. The words came out hard, absolute. And we'll go wherever you want. You're free now, Lydia. For the first time in your life, perhaps, you get to choose. She considered that. Choice. It was such a small word for such an enormous concept. She'd never truly had choices, had been told where to go, what to do, who to be, for as long as she could remember. The idea of deciding her own path was both exhilarating and terrifying. I don't know where I want to go, she admitted. I've never been anywhere. My pack's territory was... it was my whole world. Then we'll find somewhere new. Alec's voice was patient, unhurried. There's no rush. We can take our time. We. There was that word again. Lydia looked at him, really looked, and found herself cataloging the details she'd missed before. The way he held himself, coiled and ready, like a predator at rest. The calluses on his hands that spoke of years with a sword. The faint scars she could see on his forearms, evidence of battles survived. He'd called himself a traveling soldier, but everything about him suggested something more, something dangerous. "Who are you?" she asked. "Really?" Alec was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "I told you, I'm a traveling soldier." "Yes." She set aside the empty leaf, meeting his gaze directly. "But traveling soldiers don't walk through fire. They don't carry that kind of power. I could feel it last night. The air was heavy with it. With you." His expression shuddered. "You were in shock. The smoke. The fear. I know what I felt." They stared at each other across the clearing. The mate bond thrummed between them, and Lydia was suddenly, acutely aware that this man was keeping secrets. Whatever he was, it was bigger than a lone wolf wandering between territories. But then again, she had secrets too. Or she had, before she'd spilled them all in a rush of terror and exhaustion last night. "I'm not asking you to trust me," she said finally. "I know I haven't earned that. But if we're going to—" She gestured vaguely between them. "Whatever this is, I need to know that you won't lie to me about the important things." Alec exhaled slowly through his nose. For a long moment she thought he wouldn't respond at all. Then, slowly, he nodded. "I won't lie to you," he said, and the words had the weight of a vow. "I may not be able to tell you everything right now, but what I do tell you will be the truth." It wasn't everything she wanted. It wasn't even close. But it was more than anyone had ever given her before. "Okay," she said. "That's enough. For now." The tension in his shoulders eased slightly, and something that might have been gratitude flickered across his face. "We should move soon. Put more distance between us and your former pack's territory." Lydia nodded, though the thought of walking anywhere made her legs ache in anticipation. She was still weak, still recovering from the smoke inhalation and the terror of the night before. But Alec was right. They couldn't stay here. Eventually, someone would come looking. She moved to stand, and immediately, her body betrayed her. Her legs buckled, and she pitched forward. Alec was there in an instant. His arms caught her before she could fall, strong and steady, and suddenly she was pressed against his chest with his scent surrounding her completely. The mate bond roared to life, a symphony of heat and need that stole her breath and set her blood on fire. His heart was pounding. She could feel it against her palm, racing as wildly as her own. His hands gripped her waist, holding her upright, and when she looked up into his face, his irises had gone molten, all amber and no brown. "Sorry," she gasped, trying to step back. "I didn't mean—" "Don't." The word was rough, almost guttural. "Don't apologize." They were so close. Close enough that she could see the individual flecks of amber in his eyes, the slight tremor in his jaw as he fought for control. Close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin, could count the breaths he was taking. Shallow, uneven, nothing like the composed soldier he'd been moments before. The mate bond pulled at her, urging her to close the remaining distance, to press herself against him and never let go. Her wolf howled inside her, straining against months of suppression, desperate to claim what the moon goddess had promised her. Alec's hands tightened on her waist for just a moment, and then he was stepping back, releasing her, putting distance between them that felt like a physical wound. "Can you walk?" His voice was strained. "I can carry you if you need." "No." Lydia steadied herself against a tree, her legs trembling but holding. No, I can walk. She had to. Because if he carried her again, if she let herself sink into that warmth and security, she wasn't sure she'd ever be able to pull herself back out. And she couldn't afford that kind of vulnerability. Not yet. Not until she knew whether she could truly trust him. They walked in silence through the forest, Alec adjusting his pace to match hers. He stayed close enough to catch her if she stumbled, but he didn't touch her again. The distance was clearly intentional, and Lydia found herself both grateful and inexplicably disappointed by his restraint. The day wore on. The forest gave way to rolling hills, which in turn flattened into grasslands dotted with wild flowers. Lydia's strength slowly returned as they walked, her body responding to the fresh air and movement. And always, the bond was there. A current running beneath every silence, every accidental touch, every time their eyes met and held a moment too long. When the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Alec found them shelter in a small cave carved into a hillside. It was dry, protected from the wind, and large enough for both of them to stretch out comfortably. He gathered firewood while Lydia rested against the stone wall, and by the time darkness fell, a small blaze crackled at the cave's entrance. "You should sleep," he said, settling himself against the opposite wall. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Lydia nodded, though exhaustion was already pulling at her. She wrapped his cloak more tightly around herself. She'd tried to return it earlier, but he'd refused. And closed her eyes. She dreamed of fire, of smoke choking her lungs and flames licking at her skin, of a massive shadow moving through the inferno, eyes blazing gold, reaching for her. She woke with a gasp, jerking upright in the darkness. The fire had burned low, casting dancing shadows across the cave walls. Her heart was racing, her skin slick with cold sweat, and for a terrible moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then she smelled pine smoke and safety, and the panic began to recede. Alec hadn't moved from his position across the cave. He sat with his back against the stone, his eyes open and watchful in the dim light. He was still awake. Nightmare? His voice was soft, careful not to startle her further. Lydia nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She was shaking, she realized. Fine tremors running through her body that she couldn't seem to stop. Alec rose smoothly to his feet, and for a moment, she thought he would come to her. Her entire body tensed with anticipation. And something else. Something warmer, that she didn't want to examine too closely. But he only added more wood to the fire, coaxing the flames back to life until warmth filled the small cave. Then he returned to his position against the far wall, putting that careful distance between them once more. "Why do you do that?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Do what?" "Keep your distance." She gestured to the empty space between them. "You're my mate. Every instinct you have must be screaming at you to—" She stopped, heat flooding her cheeks. In the firelight she saw his throat work, a hard swallow he couldn't quite disguise. "I could ask you the same thing." It was a fair point. She was fighting the pull of the bond just as fiercely as he was, even if her reasons were different. "I've known only violence from wolves," she whispered, echoing something she'd sensed, but hadn't articulated until now. "Marin's cruelty. Torvin's—" She couldn't finish that sentence. "My pack's abandonment. Every wolf I've ever trusted has hurt me." Alec was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with an emotion she couldn't name. "Then I'll wait." "What?" "I'll wait." He met her eyes across the fire, and the gold was there again, flickering at the edges of his irises. "Until you're ready. Until you choose me, not because the bond compels you, but because you want to. I won't claim what isn't freely given." Lydia stared at him, something cracking open in her chest. "That could take— I don't know how long that could take." "I know." "You'd wait that long?" For me? The smile that curved his lips was small but genuine, the first true smile she'd seen from him. I'd wait forever, if that's what you needed. The words hung in the air between them, simple and devastating. Lydia felt tears pricking at her eyes, and she didn't try to hide them. No one had ever offered her patience. No one had ever valued her choice above their own desires. Get some sleep, Alex said gently. I'll keep watch. And he did. When Lydia finally drifted off again, it was with the knowledge that he would be there when she woke, that he would stand guard through the darkness, expecting nothing in return. She slept without nightmares for the first time in months. 3 days later, they reached the village. It was a small settlement, barely more than a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a central square. Farmers and merchants moved through the streets. Children chased each other between stalls, and the smell of baking bread filled the air. It should have felt welcoming. Instead, Lydia found herself shrinking inward as they walked through the village gates. The stares began immediately, eyes tracking their progress down the main street, lingering on Lydia's worn clothing, her unkempt hair, the visible swell of her pregnancy. She could see the judgments forming behind those gazes, the calculations, the assumptions. A packless woman, pregnant and alone except for a strange male. The conclusions were obvious, and none of them were kind. Maybe we should find another village, she murmured, trying to make herself smaller. Alex's hand brushed against the small of her back, the first time he'd touched her since that moment in the forest clearing. You need proper food. Rest. A healer to check on the baby. His voice was firm. We're staying. They found an inn near the edge of the village. The innkeeper, a sour-faced woman with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, looked Lydia up and down with obvious distaste before quoting a price for their room. That's double the going rate, Alex said mildly. For proper guests, perhaps? The innkeeper's gaze flicked to Lydia's belly. Not for packless breeders who spread their legs for any wolf who... She didn't get to finish. Alex stepped forward, and the air in the room changed. It was subtle at first, a heaviness, a pressure that made it hard to breathe. The innkeeper's words died in her throat as her eyes went wide with sudden, instinctive fear. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You will apologize to her. Each word was quiet, precise, carrying an authority that seemed to press against the walls. You will charge us a fair price, and you will never speak to her that way again. The innkeeper's face had gone white. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Behind them, the common room had gone utterly silent. Lydia could feel the other patrons frozen in their seats, caught in the same inexplicable terror that had seized the innkeeper. I'm sorry, the woman finally managed, the words tumbling out in a rush. I didn't mean... Please, I'm sorry. Half price. Free. Whatever you want. Just, please. Fair price will do. Alex's voice softened slightly, though the pressure in the room didn't ease entirely. And a hot meal for my companion, the best you have. The innkeeper nodded frantically, already backing toward the kitchen. The other patrons carefully avoided their eyes as Alec led Lydia toward a table in the corner. Lydia's heart was pounding. She'd known he was powerful, had felt it from the moment he'd walked through the flames. But this was something else entirely. That hadn't been a display of physical strength. That had been pure dominance. The kind she'd only ever seen from... You're an alpha, she breathed. Alec said nothing, but the slight tension in his shoulders was answer enough. No. She shook her head, her mind racing. Not just an alpha. The way she looked at you, the way everyone in this room is afraid to even glance in our direction. She stopped, a terrible suspicion forming in her chest. Alec, who are you? He was silent for a long moment. Around them, the inn remained unnaturally quiet, as if the very air was holding its breath. I told you I wouldn't lie to you, he finally said. About the important things. Then tell me. His eyes met hers, and there was something in his gaze she hadn't seen before. Something vulnerable, almost uncertain. My full name, he said slowly, is Alexander Thorne Varen. I am the Alpha King of the Northern Territories. The words hit Lydia like a physical blow. The Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in all the known lands, whose name was spoken in whispers and whose armies had never known defeat. The wolf who, according to every rumor she'd ever heard, had sworn never to take a mate. And he was sitting across from her in a village inn, eating bread and cheese like a common traveler. That's impossible, she heard herself say. Is it? There was no arrogance in his voice, only quiet certainty. The moon goddess doesn't make mistakes, Lydia. That's what I told you the first morning. I've spent 20 years refusing every match my council proposed, knowing that my true mate was out there somewhere. And then I heard you screaming in that burning barn and... He stopped, his voice roughening. And my wolf knew. Before I even saw your face, my wolf knew you were mine. Lydia's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table, trying to ground herself. I'm nobody. I'm a packless Omega carrying another wolf's child. You're a king. You can't... This can't... You are my mate. He said it simply, absolutely, as if that single truth outweighed every other consideration. Everything else is details. Details? A hysterical laugh bubbled up in her throat. I was locked in a barn and left to burn. I have enemies who want me dead. I'm pregnant with a child that isn't yours. How are those details? Because they change nothing about what you are to me. Alec leaned forward, his eyes burning with intensity. You could be the lowest Omega in all the lands. You could be carrying a dozen other wolves' children. You could have enemies in every territory from here to the southern seas, and I would still cross through fire for you. I would still wait however long you needed. I would still... He stopped, seeming to catch himself. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, rayer. I have spent my entire reign preparing for war, commanding armies, building alliances. I have done everything my duty required. But I have never... He broke off, looking away. I have never had anyone who was truly mine, and now that I've found you, I cannot pretend you are anything less than everything. Lydia couldn't breathe. The world had narrowed to this moment, this man, the impossible truth he was offering her. I'm scared, she whispered. I know. He reached across the table, his hand hovering over hers without quite touching. And I will never give you reason to fear me. That is my promise to you. She looked at his outstretched hand, at the scars on his knuckles, the calluses on his palms. This hand had wielded swords, had commanded armies, had shaped the fate of nations. And now it waited, trembling almost imperceptibly, for her to choose whether to take it. Slowly, so slowly, Lydia turned her hand over. Her fingers curled around his. Something new had settled between them, not the bond's usual insistent pull, but something quieter, steadier, a promise taking root. And for the first time since the flames had consumed her world, Lydia allowed herself to hope. The warmth of his hand anchored her, a steady pulse of connection that seemed to flow between their joined fingers like a river finding its course. Lydia didn't pull away, didn't retreat into the familiar fortress of her fear. She simply held on, letting the sensation wash through her. The rightness of it. The inexplicable certainty that this touch was meant to be. Alexander's thumb traced a slow circle over her knuckles, and she watched the movement as if hypnotized. His hands were so large compared to hers, capable of terrible violence, yet gentle as a whisper against her skin. We should leave soon, he said quietly, though he made no move to release her. The capital is still 3 days' ride, and there are things I need to explain before we arrive. Things? Lydia's voice came out steadier than she expected. The hope blooming in her chest was fragile, terrified of being crushed, but it was there. Real. What kind of things? A shadow passed over his features, so brief she might have imagined it. Court politics, alliances, people who have spent years positioning themselves around my throne. He paused, and when he spoke again, there was an edge to his words. People who will not welcome my return with a mate. The warmth in her chest cooled slightly. Of course. She had been so caught up in the impossibility of him, the Alpha King, her mate, that she hadn't considered what that actually meant. A king did not simply bring home a packless, pregnant Omega and expect the world to accept her. There's someone specific, she said. It wasn't a question. Alexander's jaw tightened. Her name is Kira Thornwood. Her family has been one of the most powerful in my court for generations, and she has spent the better part of a decade making it known that she intends to be my queen. Lydia's stomach dropped. And you let her believe. I let her believe nothing. His voice was sharp, final. I have rejected every proposal, every accidental meeting, every scheme her family has devised. But Kira is not someone who accepts rejection gracefully. She sees the throne as her birthright, my resistance as a temporary obstacle. His grip on Lydia's hand tightened almost imperceptibly. When she learns about you, she will see you as a threat to be eliminated. The words settled over Lydia like a shroud. Another enemy. Another person who wanted her dead. As if the ashes of her old pack weren't still smoking behind her. Then perhaps you shouldn't take me to the capital, she heard herself say. The hope in her chest screamed in protest, but the practical part of her, the part that had learned to survive, knew better than to ignore a threat. If my presence will cause you problems. No. The word was absolute, brooking no argument. Alexander rose from his seat, pulling her gently to her feet. This close, she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, and what she saw there stole her breath. Fierce protectiveness, unwavering determination, and beneath it all, a vulnerability that he seemed to be showing only to her. I will not hide you away like something shameful, he said. I will not pretend you don't exist to appease those who would see me mated to someone of their choosing. You are my mate, Lydia, my queen, and Kira Thornwood will learn to accept that, or she will learn what happens to those who threaten what is mine. The possessiveness in his voice didn't frighten her, and that was the strange thing. After Marin, after Torvin, after a pack that had treated her like something to be owned and discarded, she had every reason to flinch from the word mine. But his mine didn't sound like Torvin's. It didn't taste like chains. It tasted like belonging. She belonged to him, and he belonged to her. The thought was still terrifying, but it was also impossibly wonderful. They left the inn as the morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the village square. Lydia noticed how the villagers who had sneered at her the day before now avoided their gazes entirely, scurrying out of Alex's path like mice fleeing a hawk. Word had spread, it seemed, about the stranger who had defended the pregnant outsider with such quiet menace. If they knew the truth, that this stranger was their king, she suspected they would have done more than scurry. They would have prostrated themselves in the dirt and begged for mercy. The horse Alec had purchased from the village stable was a massive beast, coal-black and bred for hauling, though it responded to his commands as if it were a trained war horse. It stood patiently as he lifted Lydia onto its back, his hands spanning her waist with ease. She felt the heat of his palms through her borrowed clothing, and her wolf stirred restlessly, wanting more. Soon, she told herself. But not yet. Not until she was sure. Alex swung up behind her, and she felt the solid wall of his chest against her back. His arms came around her to take the reins, enclosing her in a warmth that felt less like a cage and more like a fortress. When the horse began to move, She let herself lean back against him, just slightly. His sharp intake of breath told her he'd noticed. They rode in comfortable silence for the first hour, the forest path winding steadily northward. The tension that had coiled in Lydia's shoulders since the fire began, slowly, to ease. Here, surrounded by ancient trees and birdsong, with her mate's heartbeat steady against her spine, she could almost pretend that everything would be all right. Almost. "Tell me about her," she said finally. "Kira Thornwood. I need to know what I'm facing." Alec was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "She is beautiful, ruthless, ambitious beyond measure. Her family controls the largest territory in my kingdom outside the capital itself, and she has been groomed since childhood to believe she deserves the crown." "And you never considered—" "Never." The word was immediate, emphatic. "My wolf rejected her the moment we met. There was no bond, no pull, nothing but cold ambition behind her smiles. She sees me as a means to power, nothing more." Lydia turned her head slightly, trying to read his expression. "But she's persisted anyway. For nearly 10 years?" His arms tightened around her. "She has interfered with every potential alliance, sabotaged every attempt to match me with other suitable wolves. Not because she wanted me specifically, but because she could not tolerate anyone else having what she considered hers." The picture forming in Lydia's mind was deeply unsettling. A woman who had spent a decade manipulating her way toward a throne, removing any obstacle in her path. And now Lydia, packless, pregnant, utterly without allies, was the biggest obstacle of all. "She'll try to kill me," Lydia said quietly. It wasn't a question. Alec's chest rumbled with a low growl. "She will try, and she will fail. I will not allow. You can't be with me every moment." Lydia forced herself to say the words calmly, though her heart was racing. "You're a king. You have duties, responsibilities. You can't shadow my every step. Watch me." Despite everything, a small smile curved her lips. "That's not practical." "I don't care about practical." His voice dropped lower, rougher. "I spent 20 years waiting for you, Lydia. I am not losing you to some scheming noblewoman's jealousy." The intensity in his words made her shiver. She had never been valued like this. Never been wanted so fiercely that someone would reshape their entire world to protect her. It was overwhelming, humbling, and it sparked something in her chest that felt dangerously close to love. They stopped to rest near midday, beside a stream that caught the sunlight and scattered it like diamonds across the water. Lydia's legs were shaky when Alec helped her down from the horse, and she realized with some surprise how tired she was. The pregnancy, the trauma, the emotional upheaval of the past days, it was all catching up to her. "Sit," Alec commanded gently, guiding her to a moss-covered boulder. "Rest. I'll find us something to eat." She watched him move through the forest, silent as a shadow despite his size. Everything about him spoke of predator, of power barely contained. Yet when he looked at her, all she saw was gentleness. Her hand drifted to her belly, where the tiny life inside her still clung stubbornly to existence. She hadn't felt the baby move yet. It was too early. But she knew, somehow, that it was still there. Still fighting. Just like her. "Your child will be raised as my heir." Lydia's head snapped up. Alec had returned, moving so quietly she hadn't heard him approach. He held several fish in one hand, clearly caught with his bare hands, and his expression was serious as he watched her. "What?" she breathed. He crouched before her, eye level now, his gaze unwavering. "Your child. The one you carry. They will be mine in every way that matters. I will claim them before the court. Name them my heir. Love them with the ferocity of a true parent." He reached out, his hand hovering over her belly without quite touching. Their blood may come from another, but their soul, their future, their protection, their belonging, that will be entirely mine to provide, if you will allow me. Tears pricked at Lydia's eyes. She had expected tolerance, perhaps. Grudging acceptance. She had never dared to hope for this. "You barely know me," she whispered. "You don't know anything about the father, about what happened. I know that someone hurt you." His voice was low, dangerous. "I know that your pack betrayed you in the worst possible way. And I know that this child is innocent of all of it. They deserve a father who will protect them, provide for them, love them without condition." His eyes softened. "I would be honored to be that father if you'll let me." The tears spilled over, tracking hot paths down her cheeks. She couldn't speak, could barely breathe around the enormity of what he was offering. Alec's hand finally made contact with her belly, warm and steady through the fabric of her dress. The bond responded, a pulse of warmth flowing from where his palm rested, as though the connection between them recognized the life she carried and drew it into its orbit. She saw his eyes widen, saw his breath catch. The bond. He looked up at her, wonder breaking through his controlled expression. "It's reaching for the baby, too." "Yes." Lydia covered his hand with hers, pressing it more firmly against her belly. "I feel it." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The stream burbled nearby, birds sang in the trees, and the silence between them felt less like distance and more like peace. Lydia felt something shift inside her chest, a wall crumbling, a door opening. She was still afraid, still uncertain. But she was also, she realized, beginning to trust. And that terrified her more than anything. They rode harder that afternoon, Alec pushing them toward a small trading post where he said they could spend the night. The forest gradually gave way to rolling hills, and by the time the sun began its descent, Lydia could see the stone walls of the outpost in the distance. She was nearly asleep against Alec's chest when he suddenly tensed, his arms going rigid around her. "What is it?" she asked, jerking awake. He didn't answer immediately. His nostrils flared, and she saw his eyes flash gold, his wolf rising to the surface. "Alec? We're being watched." His voice was barely a whisper, but she heard the steel in it. 3 wolves, 2 in the trees to our left, 1 on the ridge ahead. Fear spiked through her, cold and sharp. "Kira's people?" "I don't know yet." His hand moved to the sword at his hip. "But we're about to find out." The attack came without warning. One moment the road was empty. The next, 3 wolves in human form dropped from the trees, surrounding them in a practiced formation. They wore no identifying marks, their faces obscured by dark cloth. But the silver blades in their hands told Lydia everything she needed to know. They were here for her. Alec moved faster than she could track, sweeping her off the horse and pressing her behind him in a single fluid motion. His sword was in his hand, singing as it cleared the sheath, and his growl shook the very air around them. "Run," he commanded. "I won't leave you. Run." But there was nowhere to run. A 4th attacker had circled behind them, cutting off her escape. Lydia's wolf howled with terror and rage as the assassin advanced, Silverblade gleaming in the fading light. She was going to die. After everything, the fire, the escape, the impossible gift of her mate, she was going to die on a nameless road, and her baby with her. The assassin lunged, and then Alec was there, appearing between them like a phantom, his blade catching the silver dagger inches from Lydia's throat. The clash of metal rang out, and she saw the assassin's eyes widen behind his mask, recognizing, finally, what he was facing. But the distraction had cost Alec. The other 3 assassins closed in, and Lydia watched in horror as one of them landed a slash across his side. Blood bloomed, dark against his traveling clothes. "No!" The scream tore from her throat. Alec didn't falter. He moved through the assassins like a storm, his sword a blur of death, each strike precise and devastating. Within moments, 2 of the attackers were down, their blood staining the road. But the third had a bow. Lydia saw it in slow motion, the assassin knocking an arrow, drawing back, aiming directly at Alex's exposed back, while he dealt with the last attacker. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. She simply moved, throwing herself at the archer with every ounce of strength she possessed. They went down in a tangle of limbs, the arrow flying wide, clattering uselessly against the rocks. The assassin snarled, trying to throw her off, but Lydia held on with desperate strength. "Lydia!" Alex's voice, ragged with fear. The assassin's elbow caught her temple, and stars exploded across her vision. She felt herself falling, felt the hard ground slam into her side. And then the world narrowed to a single point. The silver blade rising above her, glinting in the dying light. The blade never fell. Alex's sword took the assassin's head clean off his shoulders, and then he was gathering Lydia into his arms, his hands running over her frantically, checking for wounds. "I'm okay," she gasped. "I'm okay. The baby... We need to go. Now." He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, already moving toward the horse. "That wasn't a random attack. Someone knew where we would be." The implications hit Lydia like a blow. Someone had known. Someone had tipped off the assassins, told them exactly where to find the Alpha King's new mate. Someone at court was already making moves against her. And they had almost succeeded. As Alec urged the horse into a gallop, Lydia clung to him, her mind racing. She had known Kira Thornwood would be a threat. But she had not expected the attack to come so quickly, so brutally. Whatever happened next, one thing was clear. The game had begun. And Lydia was playing for her life. And her child's. She looked up at Alex's face, set in grim lines as he guided them toward the outpost. His wound was still bleeding, she realized. He had been hurt protecting her. "You're injured," she said. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing." She pressed her hand against his side, feeling the wetness of blood. "You need to stop. Let me... when we're safe." His arm tightened around her. Not before. The outpost gates loomed ahead, torches flickering in the darkness. Safety. At least for tonight. But as they passed through the gates, Lydia couldn't shake the feeling that they had merely exchanged one danger for another. The walls around them might keep out assassins, but they could not protect her from the political viper's nest that awaited in the capital. Kira Thornwood had made her opening move. Now it was Lydia's turn to decide how to respond. The outpost physician, Mira, was a compact woman with sharp eyes and no patience for royal stoicism. She stitched Alexander's wound with practiced efficiency while he sat rigid on the cot, refusing to wince. "You." Mira turned to Lydia the moment the last bandage was tied. "Sit. I'm not hurt. You're pregnant, you've survived a fire and a road ambush in the same week, and you smell like wolfsbane." Mira's expression hardened into something dangerous. "Who gave you wolfsbane?" Lydia's mouth opened. Closed. "My former pack. They made me take it. Every morning, for months." Mira's hand stilled on the shelf she'd been reaching for. When she spoke again, her voice was very controlled. "Wolfsbane in a pregnant woman. Do they understand what that does to a developing child? To the mother?" She didn't wait for an answer. She was already pulling jars down, mixing something dark and sharp-smelling in a clay cup. "Drink this, all of it. It will purge the residue from your blood." The draft tasted like iron and fury. Lydia gagged, but she drained the cup, and within minutes she felt it. A stirring, deep and primal, like a creature waking from a long, drugged sleep. Her wolf. Not the faint whisper she'd been clinging to for months, but a presence, full-throated and fierce, flooding back into the spaces the wolfsbane had hollowed out. Scents sharpened. The room snapped into focus. Mira's herbs, Alexander's blood and pine smoke, the old stone walls, the rain hammering outside. Alexander watched her face change, and something like relief broke through his careful composure. "There she is," he murmured. Lydia pressed her hand to her chest, tears pricking her eyes. She had almost forgotten what it felt like to be whole. The doors burst open the next morning. Soldiers poured into the outpost common room, and Lydia's hand went to the knife Alexander had given her before she recognized the deep crimson of the royal guard. They dropped to their knees the moment they saw Alexander. "Your Majesty," the commander's voice shook. "We received word of the attack. Lady Thornwood sent us to ensure your safety, to finish what her assassins started." Alexander's voice cut through the room like a blade. He was on his feet, his eyes fixed on the kneeling soldiers. "How did Thornwood know we would be attacked on that road? Unless she was the one who sent the assassins in the first place." The commander's face drained of color. "Your Majesty, surely you don't—" "I mean exactly what I say." Alexander's power rolled through the room like a physical weight. "Lady Thornwood ordered an assassination attempt on my mate and my heir, and now she sends my own guard. We would never—" "Commander." Alexander's voice dropped to something almost gentle, which somehow made it more terrifying. "How many of your men answer to Thornwood?" The commander's eyes darted to the soldiers behind him, and Lydia's restored wolf caught it all. Not just the flicker of guilt in his face, but the elevated heartbeats of 3 soldiers in the room, the acrid spike of fear sweat beneath their armor, and beneath it all, the faint trace of Thornwood rose perfume clinging to their clothes like a signature. 3 of them," Lydia said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. "The 2 by the door and the 1 near the window. Their hearts are racing, and they carry her scent." Alexander's expression held no warmth. "My mate has a keen nose, keener than she did yesterday, now that the wolfsbane your employer forced on her has been purged." He turned to the commander. "Arrest the 3. Hold them for interrogation. I want everything. Routes, payments. Who else is in Thornwood's network?" The commander nodded, and guards began moving toward the identified soldiers. "The rest of you will escort us to the capital. Speak to no one about what you've witnessed here." The interrogation of the 3 loyalists lasted through the night. They broke faster than Lydia expected. But then, Kira had treated them as expendable from the start. Disposable tools to be used and discarded. When Alexander offered leniency in exchange for full cooperation, they had very little reason to protect a woman who would never have protected them. By morning, he had names, delivery routes for coded letters, and a chain of payments that traced back to the Thornwood estate. The journey to the capital took 3 days. Lydia spent most of it on horseback, her body aching, her mind racing. Alexander barely left her side, his presence a constant warmth at her back, his scent wrapping around her like armor. They didn't speak much during the day. There were too many ears, too many potential spies. But at night, when they made camp, he would sit beside her and tell her about the capital. He told her about the throne room with its ceiling of stars, enchanted to show the night sky even during the day. He told her about the gardens where moonflowers bloomed year-round, their petals silver white and fragrant. He told her about his mother, who had died giving birth to him, and his father, who had ruled with an iron fist until a fever took him 5 years ago. "Kira has been positioning herself since before my father died," he said on the second night, his voice low so only she could hear. "She believes she should be queen. Her family is old, powerful. She has allies throughout the court. And now you've brought home a pregnant, packless commoner." Lydia couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "I'm not exactly what they were expecting." "No." Alexander's hand found hers in the darkness. "You're better." She wanted to believe him. Goddess, how she wanted to believe him. But the fear coiled tight in her chest, cold and insistent. She had seen how quickly those she trusted could turn on her. She had felt the flames consuming the barn, had heard her pack's silence as they left her to die. "What if I'm not strong enough?" she whispered. "What if I can't?" Lydia. He turned her face toward him, his thumb brushing her cheek. In the firelight his eyes were dark, but she could see the amber bleeding through at their edges. "You threw yourself at an armed assassin to save me. You have more strength than you know." "That was different. That was you choosing to fight." His voice was fierce now, almost angry. "That was you refusing to let them take what's yours. Don't you understand? That's what a Luna does. That's what a queen does." The word hung between them. Queen. It still felt impossible, like a dream she would wake from at any moment. But his hand was warm in hers, and his eyes held nothing but certainty. And maybe it was possible after all. On the third night, with the capital less than a day's ride ahead, he taught her something else. "There are protections written into the old law that even the noble council cannot override," he said, feeding small sticks to the fire. "The oldest is called the right of truth-speaking. If a woman bound by a true mate bond is accused before the court, she can invoke it. The bond amplifies her words, not to give her knowledge she doesn't have, but to let the room feel the truth of what she says. Every person present will know whether she speaks honestly." "Has anyone used it?" "Not in 3 centuries. Most wolves think it's a legend." He glanced at her, and his expression was careful. "I hope you never need it. But if Kira moves against you in court, I want you armed with more than my sword." On the morning of the third day, they crested a hill, and Lydia saw the capital for the first time. It sprawled across the valley below them, a massive city of stone and light. Towers rose toward the sky, their spires catching the morning sun. At the center, dominating everything, stood the palace, a fortress of white stone that seemed to glow from within. "Welcome home," Alexander said quietly. Home. The word felt strange on her tongue. She had never had a home. Not really. The pack that raised her had never truly been hers. The barn where they'd locked her had never been sanctuary. But as they rode through the gates, as crowds gathered to stare at their alpha king and the unknown woman at his side, Lydia felt something shift in her chest. Maybe home wasn't a place. Maybe it was a person. Maybe it was the mate whose heartbeat she could feel echoing through their bond, steady and sure. They reached the palace steps, and Lydia barely had time to dismount before Kira Thornwood appeared. She was beautiful in the way that predators were beautiful, all sharp angles and cold precision. Her hair was dark as midnight, swept up in an elaborate style that showed off her long neck and the diamond collar at her throat. Her gown was blood-red silk, and her smile was a blade. "Your Majesty," she purred, dropping into a curtsy so deep it was almost mocking. "We were so worried when we heard about the attack. Thank the moon you're safe." Her eyes flicked to Lydia, dismissing her in a single glance. "And you've brought a guest, I see." "My mate," Alexander said flatly. "Lydia Windrider, future Luna Queen." The crowd that had gathered fell silent. Lydia felt hundreds of eyes on her, judging, calculating. She lifted her chin and met Kira's gaze without flinching. Something flickered in those cold eyes. Surprise? Maybe? Or the recognition of a worthy opponent. "How lovely," Kira said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "But surely your Majesty knows that court protocol requires that you address my mate with respect." Alexander's power rolled through the courtyard, and Lydia saw several nobles stagger under its weight. "Call her guest again, and we'll have a very different conversation." Kira's smile didn't waver, but Lydia caught the flash of rage beneath it. "Of course. My apologies, Lady Windrider." The title was poison wrapped in silk. "I look forward to getting to know you better." She swept away before Alexander could respond, her entourage falling in behind her like a school of predatory fish. "She's going to be a problem," Lydia said quietly. She's going to try. Alexander took her hand, tucking it into the crook of his elbow. But she doesn't know what she's dealing with. Not yet. The 3 days that followed were the longest of Lydia's life. The palace was a labyrinth of marble corridors and silk-draped chambers, and every corner held a whisper. Lydia's restored wolf picked up everything now. The muttered, packless whore from a passing lady-in-waiting, the way servants averted their eyes, the subtle repositioning of Kira's entourage whenever Lydia entered a room. She was being watched, measured, and found wanting by everyone except the man whose opinion actually mattered. On the first evening, her wolf caught something wrong in the wine they served with dinner. A sharp chemical bitterness buried beneath the sweetness. She set the cup down without drinking. She told Alexander, and his face went still with the kind of calm that preceded violence. "Don't confront her," Lydia said quietly. "Not yet. Let me build the case first." He stared at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, that the frightened Omega he'd carried from a burning barn was gone, replaced by someone with claws of her own. "You're already thinking like a queen," he said. On the second day, she found the kitchen maid, a girl barely 16, with terrified eyes, who confessed that a woman from Lady Thornwood's household had delivered a small vial to the kitchens with specific instructions for Lydia's evening meal. Lydia promised her protection and brought the testimony to the king's steward. That same evening, Alexander laid the interrogation records from the outpost on the table between them. Names, delivery routes for coded letters, a payment chain connecting the road assassins directly to the Thornwood estate, and a detail that made Lydia's blood run cold. The captured loyalists had been instructed to confirm her death, not prevent it. Kira's rescue party had been a cleanup crew. "She had contingencies for any mate you might bring home," Lydia said, staring at the documents. "This wasn't about me, specifically. This was about keeping the throne empty beside yours until she could fill it." By the third morning, Lydia had compiled everything: the poisoned wine, the kitchen maid's testimony, the loyalists' confessions, the payment trail. She reviewed it twice, memorizing the details. Whatever came next, she would not be caught without an answer. The formal accusation came that afternoon. Lydia was in the private garden when the guards came for her, the leather folder of evidence on the bench beside her. She wasn't surprised. She had felt the accusation building like a storm for days. "Lady Windrider." The guard's voice was apologetic but firm. "You're required in the throne room, by order of the noble council." Alexander appeared at her side almost immediately, his face dark with fury. "What is this?" "The council has convened an emergency session, Your Majesty." The guard wouldn't meet his eyes. "Lady Thornwood has brought formal accusations against your intended mate." The throne room was packed. Every noble in the capital seemed to have crowded into the vast space, their whispers echoing off the star-painted ceiling. At the center, standing before the raised dais where Alexander's throne sat empty, was Kira Thornwood. She looked triumphant. "Ah, there she is." Kira's voice carried through the room, silencing the whispers. "The woman who has bewitched our king." "Careful, Kira." Alexander's warning was a growl. "Choose your next words very carefully." "I speak only truth, Your Majesty." Kira turned to address the crowd, her arms spread wide. This woman appeared from nowhere, packless and pregnant with another wolf's child. She has no family, no connections, no status. And yet our Alpha King claims she is his true mate? She laughed, the sound ringing false. "Is it not more likely that she is a spy? A plant from one of our enemies, designed to weaken the throne?" The whispers rose again, uglier now. Lydia heard the words, whore, traitor, breeder, and felt them land like blows. "I demand trial by combat," Kira declared. "Let the goddess decide if this woman is truly innocent, and when she fails, let her be executed as the spy she is." "No," Alexander stepped forward, his power filling the room. If there is to be combat, I will fight in her stead. You cannot. An old man stepped forward, one of the council members, his face stern. The accused must defend themselves or find a champion who is not blood-related or mated. As you have not yet marked her, you are not technically her mate under law. Kira's smile widened. You see, Your Majesty? Even the law agrees. This woman must. I invoke the right of truth-speaking. Lydia's voice rang out clear and strong, cutting through the chaos. The words came from memory. Alex's voice by the campfire 4 nights ago, quiet and deliberate, telling her about the old laws. She hadn't expected to need them so soon. She felt the mate bond rise in response, not flooding her with knowledge she didn't have, but lending its weight to her voice, amplifying the truth she carried until it pressed against the walls of the throne room like a living thing. The crowd fell silent. What did you say? Kira's face had gone pale. The right of truth speaking. Lydia stepped forward past Alexander's protective arm into the center of the room. I claim it by virtue of my mate bond. I claim it as the future Luna of this pack. You can't I? Lydia felt her wolf rising, felt power she didn't know she possessed flowing through her veins. I may not be marked yet, but the bond is real. It exists. And it gives me the right to speak truth before this court. Truth that cannot be denied. The old councilman's eyes had gone wide. The right of truth-speaking hasn't been invoked in 3 centuries. It was thought to be mere legend. Does the law not still stand? Lydia demanded. Yes or no? A long pause. The councilman's brow furrowed, and then, slowly, something like recognition crossed his face. The champion law requires a completed bond, a marking. But the right of truth-speaking is older. It predates the marking requirement entirely. It asks only that the bond be true, verified by its own power. He looked between Lydia and Alexander. If her bond is genuine, the law stands. Lydia turned to face the crowd. She found Kira's eyes and held them. On my first night in this palace, my evening wine was laced with poison. Her voice carried the weight of the mate bond, truth made tangible, pressing against every person in the room. My wolf, only recently freed from the wolfsbane my former pack forced on me, recognized the taste before I could swallow more than a sip. The kitchen maid who delivered it has given testimony naming a member of Lady Thornwood's household as the one who provided the vial. She saw nobles shift uncomfortably, felt the truth-speaking work through them, not omniscience, not compulsion, but conviction. They could feel that she was not lying. The bond guaranteed it. On the King's Road, 4 assassins attacked us with silver blades. 3 of them died. The 4th was among the soldiers Lady Thornwood sent to rescue us at the eastern outpost. Soldiers who, under interrogation, confessed that they received their orders, their route information, and their silver from the Thornwood estate. Lydia paused, letting the words settle. Those confessions, along with coded correspondence and a full chain of payments, sit in the King's Steward's office. Any council member who wishes to examine them is welcome to do so. Kira's composure was cracking. You can't prove. I just did. Lydia's voice didn't waver. I am not a spy. I am not a plant. I am the true mate of your king. And the only conspiracy in this room belongs to the woman who accuses me. The words settled over the throne room like a verdict. For a long moment, no one moved. I would see this evidence. The voice came from the back of the chamber. Lord Ashford, one of the most senior nobles in the court and, until this moment, one of Kira's most visible supporters. His face was gray beneath his ceremonial furs. Steward. Alexander did not raise his voice. His steward stepped forward with the leather folder Lydia had compiled. The room watched in absolute silence as Lord Ashford read, page by page, his expression shifting from skepticism to disbelief to something that looked very much like shame. He closed the folder. He did not look at Kira. "The letters bear the Thornwood family seal," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a man choosing a side. "I recognize it. I have received letters under that seal myself, though none with contents like these." The murmur that swept through the room was different from the whispers that had come before. Not ugly, not accusatory, stunned. A woman in silver stepped deliberately away from Kira's cluster of supporters, crossing the floor to stand behind Alexander's throne. Then a second noble followed, then a third. "This is a fabrication," Kira said, but the conviction had drained from her voice like water from a cracked vessel. She turned to the crowd, arms spread wide as they had been moments ago when she'd stood as accuser, but the gesture that had looked commanding before now looked desperate. "Surely you can see. A Packless Omega cannot simply—" "Lady Thornwood." The old councilman's voice was heavy with the gravity of a man who understood what he was about to end. "The evidence has been presented. The truth speaking confirms the speaker's honesty. Do you wish to submit to questioning under oath?" A pause. "Or do you have a truth of your own to offer?" Kira's mouth opened. Closed. Her gaze swept the room, searching for an ally, a defender, anyone who might still take her side. She found no one willing to meet her eyes. Then she turned to what remained of her support. Not the political opportunists, who had already stepped away, but the ones bound to her by blood and name. Her father, her inner circle. The handful who would fall when the Thornwood name fell. "Father." Her voice had gone thin, stripped of its silk. "Lady Voss, you promised this would never—" She caught herself, but too late. The slip hung in the air like smoke. Lord Thornwood looked at his daughter, and what passed across his face was not loyalty. It was horror. Slowly, deliberately, he turned away. One by one, even her blood allies followed. Eyes dropped. Bodies shifted. The last handful who had still stood with her found somewhere else to look, someone else to stand beside. Within seconds, Kira Thornwood stood utterly alone in the center of the throne room. "Guards?" Alexander said quietly. Kira bolted. She hiked her elaborate gown above her knees and ran for the doors, abandoning every shred of the calculated poise she'd spent a decade constructing. 2 royal guards caught her before she made it 3 steps. "She's nothing!" Kira screamed, thrashing against their grip. "A broodmare from a dead pack. I would have given you everything, power, alliances, an empire. What can she possibly give you?" Alexander's eyes went full gold, burning like suns. "She gives me truth," he said, "where you offered only lies." His voice carried to every corner of the room. "Kira Thornwood, you are stripped of name, title, and the protection of this court. Your family's estates are seized pending investigation. You have until moonrise to be beyond our borders. If you are ever seen in my kingdom again, your life is forfeit." Kira stared at him, hatred and disbelief warring on her face. Then she looked at Lydia, and what she saw there made her flinch. Lydia didn't know what expression she wore. She only knew that her wolf was howling in triumph, that the mate bond was singing, that for the first time in her life, she had power. Kira Thornwood turned and fled. That night, Alexander took Lydia to his private chambers. The room was warm with firelight, the bed covered in furs the color of midnight. Through the window, the moon hung full and bright, bathing everything in silver. "You were magnificent." Alexander's voice was rough. He stood before her, his hands at his sides, his whole body trembling with restraint. "The truth speaking, I taught you the law, but I never imagined you would wield it like that." "Neither did I." Lydia's heart was pounding. The mate bond was a living thing between them, pulling her toward him with an almost physical force. "But I couldn't let her win. I couldn't let her take you from me. Nothing could take me from you." He moved closer, and she felt his heat, smelled the pine smoke and ancient power of him. Lydia, my Lydia, I need, I know. She reached for him, her fingers brushing his chest. She felt his sharp intake of breath, felt the shudder that ran through him. I want it too. Are you sure? His voice was strained, barely controlled. The marking, it's permanent, eternal. Once I bite you, once you bite me, there's no going back. I don't want to go back. She took his face in her hands, pulling him down until their foreheads touched. I spent my whole life being afraid, being abandoned, being told I wasn't enough. You saw me burning, and you walked through fire. You held me when I trembled. You knelt before me and asked me to choose you. She kissed him softly. I choose you. I choose us. I choose this. Something broke in him then. His arms came around her, crushing her to his chest, and his mouth found hers in a kiss that was hunger and desperation and relief all at once. She kissed him back with equal ferocity, her hands tangling in his hair, her body pressing against his. Mate. He growled against her lips. Mine. Yours, she breathed, and you're mine. He walked her backward to the bed, laying her down on the furs with a gentleness that contrasted with the wildness in his eyes. His hands trembled as he unlaced her gown, as he bared her skin to the moonlight. She watched his face as he looked at her body, at the slight swell of her belly where their air grew, and saw nothing but reverence. Beautiful, he murmured. You are so beautiful. She pulled at his shirt, needing to feel his skin against hers. He helped her, and then they were pressed together, warmth and strength, and the electric pulse of the mate bond singing between them. He kissed his way down her throat, and she felt his teeth graze her skin. The junction of her neck and shoulder, the marking spot. Her whole body tightened in anticipation. Now, she whispered. Please, Alec. Now. His mouth sealed over the spot. She felt his tongue, hot and wet, felt his breath against her skin, and then his teeth sank deep. Pain exploded through her, sharp and searing, and she cried out. But the pain transformed even as it bloomed, shifting into something else entirely. Heat cascaded through her veins like wildfire, like starlight, like every good thing she had ever felt multiplied 1,000-fold. The mate bond that had been a thread between them burst into a river, an ocean, a universe of connection. She felt him, not just his body against hers, but his soul, his love, vast and unwavering, his fear that he wasn't enough to protect her, his joy at finding her, his wonder that she had chosen him, his wolf howling in triumph, and beneath it all, a tenderness so profound it brought tears to her eyes. He pulled back, his mouth bloody, his eyes blazing gold. Lydia! She didn't let him finish. She surged up, gripping his hair, and found the junction of his neck and shoulder. Her teeth were human, but her wolf lent her strength, and she bit down hard. His groan shattered the silence. She tasted his blood, copper and power and home, and felt the bond complete itself. Now she felt everything, his pleasure, sharp and overwhelming, his need for her, his absolute belonging. They were one. They had always been one. They would always be one. Mine, she gasped against his blood. Yours, he groaned. Mate. Mine. Forever. They held each other as the bond settled, waves of warmth and completion washing over them. Lydia pressed her hand to his mark, feeling it pulse beneath her palm. He pressed his lips to hers, gentler now, reverent. I love you, he whispered. I have loved you since the moment I saw you through the flames. I love you too. She didn't know when it had happened. Maybe it had happened all at once. Maybe it had grown slowly over days and miles and small moments of trust. It didn't matter. It was true, and the mate bond carried her truth to him, let him feel it in his very soul. They stayed tangled together until dawn painted the sky gold, and for the first time in her life, Lydia slept without fear. The coronation was held on the first full moon of autumn. The throne room was filled with moonlight, streaming through windows designed to capture the silver glow. Thousands had gathered to witness the crowning of their new Luna Queen. Nobles, soldiers, common folk who had traveled from every corner of the kingdom. Lydia stood before them in a gown of midnight blue, her mate mark proudly visible above the neckline. Beside her, Alexander wore the ceremonial armor of the Alpha King, his crown resting on his dark hair. But all eyes were on her. "People of the Shadowfang Kingdom," Alexander announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast room. "I present to you Lydia Windrider. She came to us from fire and ruin. She stood against those who wished to destroy her. She spoke truth when lies surrounded her. And she chose, freely, completely, to be your Luna." He lifted the crown, a circlet of silver set with moonstones that glowed softly in the light. "Today, I crown her not because she is my mate, but because she has proven herself worthy. Today, she becomes queen." The crown settled on Lydia's head, cool and solid and real. She felt its weight, felt the bond between herself and the pack stretching out to encompass thousands of souls. They were hers now, all of them, and she was theirs. "Queen Lydia!" someone shouted, and then the whole room was chanting it, the sound rising to shake the rafters. "Queen Lydia! Luna Queen!" She looked at Alexander and found him smiling, his eyes soft with pride. He took her hand and raised it, presenting her to their people, and the chanting grew louder still. That night they stood together on the balcony overlooking the moonlit gardens. Lydia's hand rested on her belly, which had grown rounder in the weeks since their marking. She could feel the baby now, tiny flutters of movement that made her heart swell with love. "Our heir will know only love," Alexander said softly, his hand joining hers on her belly. "They will never know abandonment, never know cruelty. They will grow up surrounded by pack, by family, by the certainty that they belong. Our pack will know only strength." Lydia leaned back against him, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones. "Strength and justice. We'll build something better, Alec. Something worthy of the kingdom we've been given." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Together. Together," she agreed. The moon rose higher, bathing them in silver light. Somewhere in the distance, wolves howled, not in mourning, but in celebration. The sound carried across the kingdom, a chorus of joy and welcome. Lydia thought of the barn where she had almost died, the pack that had abandoned her, the fire that had consumed everything she had ever known. She thought of Torvin, who had received Alexander's justice 3 weeks ago, his rank stripped, his name struck from the pack rolls, banished to the unclaimed lands where no pack would shelter him. She thought of Maren, who had wept and begged and been shown exactly the mercy she had shown Lydia in that barn. None. The Alpha who had looked at her with cold eyes and told her she brought shame. He had knelt before the Alpha King and surrendered his territory without a fight. The pack that had tried to burn her alive now answered to a new Alpha chosen by Alexander himself. She had lost so much, but standing here, in the arms of her mate, crowned queen of the realm, carrying the future within her, she had gained everything. "Are you happy?" Alexander asked softly. Lydia smiled, and the answer resonated through their bond before she even spoke. "Yes," she said, "I am."